In part 1 of The Reach, I described the lands of the Reach and its legendary figure, Garth Golden Han, whose children almost all houses in the Reach claim descent from. However, it was Garth Golden Han's firstborn and greatest child, Garth the Gardener, that became the most important for the Reach and its history. So this video, let's talk about the first men coming to the Reach and settling down, and the Gardener Kings and how they ruled this realm. So we know during the Dawn Age, some 12,000 plus years before the books, the first men came to Westeros via the Arm of Dorne, which at the time wasn't broken. While we don't know exactly why they decided to come to a new continent, Maesters believe they may have originated from the grasslands of Essos, the Dothraki Sea. Legend claims the first men were led to Westeros via the Arm of Dorne by a leader. While the North states the first king was the leader, the Reach believes it was the High King of the first men who was actually Garth Golden Han, which, as I pointed out in part 1, you can kind of understand why those of the Reach would want to make that claim. That means through their legendary figure who chose the Reach to settle in, because obviously it was the best location, the other kingdoms could be settled and conquered. So for this video, let's pretend it was Garth Golden Han who came to the Reach to settle down and have his many children that led the first men. So when the first men came and Garth Golden Han settled in the Reach, there was one small and big problem. The continent was populated with children of the forest and giants. Understandably, the natives didn't want to give up their lands for these new invaders. But the first men that stayed in the Reach also didn't want to give up the green and fertile lands of this area. Using their great bronze axes, the first men chopped down the children of the forest's sacred weirwoods and burned them to the ground, forcing the children out of their sacred groves and hollow hills. In part 1, I also talked about Garth's children, some of which are credited with kicking the giants from this area. But regardless of how it exactly happened, eventually with their superior weapons and aggression, the children of the forest and giants were mostly successfully pushed out of the Reach. But the first men didn't just fight the children and the giants. They, of course, fought with each other. Many petty kings, kingdoms, and proud lords fought and killed for glory, land, and gold in the Reach. Maesters describe century after century of fighting as towns burned and women wailed. This may sound very familiar to the other realms I've done history videos on because, well, it is. Many petty kings popped up wherever the first men moved throughout Westeros. But there was a huge difference between the Reach and other realms. Because almost all of the Reach claimed a common ancestor from Garth Golden Han, they had a certain kinship that bound them together that the other realms didn't have. This common ancestry, and because Garth the Gardener was considered the greatest of Garth Golden Han's children, is believed to be the reason Garth the Gardener and afterwards his descendants were the predominant power in the Reach. Not that others didn't try to get as much power. However, despite the many petty kings that may have tried, none came close to the power House Gardener had. Others in the Reach may have called themselves kings, but no one questioned that the Gardeners were the High Kings, and the lesser monarchs bowed to them, respecting and honoring them. While these centuries of bloodshed as the children of the forest and giants were fought, and many kingdoms came and went, it also saw the creation of quite a few fearless warriors in the Reach. Most well known being Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, Davos the Dragon Slayer, Roland of the Horn, and the Knight Without Armor. Interestingly, all being considered knights, even though knighthood didn't come to Westeros until the Andals came. But for part 2 of the Reach, let's focus on House Gardener since they were so important to the Reach, ruling for thousands of years before Aegon's conquest. So again, Garth the Gardener was the first Gardener King and founder of House Gardener. He built his home on a hill on top of the Mander, which became known as Highgarden. He made a living throne called the Oaken Seat that grew from an oak that his father himself had planted. Garth and all the Gardener Kings would sit on this throne. Well, until it was destroyed, but that would happen much later, and I'll talk about in a future part. In times of war, the kings of House Gardener would wear a crown of bronze thorns, later iron, and in times of peace, crowns of vines and flowers. Because of where Garth built their home, it located them and gave them control of the Reach proper, which became the core of the Kingdom of the Reach. As would be expected, as time went on, House Gardner increased their territory, claiming the western marches between Horn Hill and Night Song. Next, with Garth III, known as the Great, with pacts of friendship and mutual defense, Old Oak, Red Lake, and Golden Grove all joined their domain. Next, Mern III was able to bring the Arbor, where they make the best wine, into his kingdom when the last king of the Arbor, Mern's cousin, was lost at sea, and he made House Red Wine his vassals. But the Gardners kept pushing, and soon King Garland II, the bridegroom, was able to secure House Hightower of Old Town and their domains into the realm. Given his nickname, you can probably guess how he did that. Through marriage. By King Garland II marrying his daughter to Lord Laemon Hightower and King Garland II putting aside his own wives to marry Laemon's daughter, he was able to bring Old Town into his kingdom. Next, King Gawain II, the Fat, may have not had the greatest nickname, but he's known for resolving a dispute between Lord Manderley, who at the time were still located in the Reach, and Lord Peake brilliantly. Not only did he solve the issue between the men, but he accepted fealty for their lands without bloodshed or a single battle. Goes to show a shitty nickname isn't everything. Now John II, the Tall, was the next king we know of that was a bit interesting. For whatever reason, he decided to sail his barge to the headwaters of the Mander, planting the banner of the Green Hand wherever he went, and received homage from petty kings and lords alike. Interestingly, we know of some of the Gardners' legendary warrior kings, but we don't know much about them. There is Garth V, known as the Hammer of the Dornish, which leads me to believe he laid the smackdown on the Dornish from time to time. Then there was Gawain I, the Gallant, which I'm guessing was because he was very brave in his warring. Then there is Giles I, known as the Woe, who once sacked Old Town and, if stories are correct, sold 3/4 of its population into slavery. However, he did fail to breach the defenses of the Hightower on Battle Isle. And obviously this was before Old Town was brought into their realm. The Gardner kings weren't batshit crazy. Mostly. Lastly, we know of Gordon I, known as the Grey Eyes, who probably had gray eyes. While these legendary warrior kings haven't been fleshed out much by George, we at least know about them. So, that's something. Now you may be wondering, Roris, when do those asshole Ironborn come into this? Because you know, if your land touches the Sunset Sea, chances are the Ironborn are going to be douches and attack you. As you'd expect, the Reach had problems with the Iron Islands repeatedly through history. For centuries, the Reach and those on the western shore were victims of the Iron Islands, who dominated almost all of the western shore from Bear Island to the Arbor. Their longships were incredibly swift, able to strike and depart before a defense could even be made, making mounting a response almost impossible. But just not that, the Ironborn were unpredictable, their raiders attacking unexpected places and catching those on the western shores unaware. The Ironborn even established themselves on the Shield Islands, called the Misty Islands at the time, by killing all the men on the islands and claiming their women as their own. This made attacking the areas of the Reach even easier, and though the Ironborn wouldn't go far inland, they still controlled the Sunset Sea, forcing terrible tributes from the fisherfolk along the coasts. For centuries, the Ironborn were even able to raid up the Mander with almost no consequence. Perhaps the most feared Ironborn leader during this time was King Corrid, who claimed his writ ran, "Wherever men can smell saltwater or hear the crash of waves." Corrid was known as Cord the Cruel in the Reach, and if you want a sense of the kings that followed him, they were called Hagon the Terrible and Joron Maiden's Bane. As you'd expect, the Gardner kings got sick of the Ironborn shit fast. They were in luck because others were also tired of the Ironborn. Sometimes in the Gardner kings' need to stop the Ironborn, and through mutual hatred. They would team up with the Lords of Old Town and the Kings of the Rock to take on the Iron Islands. We know of at least 6 Gardener kings that died in battle against the Ironborn. First, we know of Gareth II, the Grim, who was slain in battle by Haran Harlal, the current High King of the Iron Islands, beneath the walls of Old Town. Next, Garth VI Gardener, called the Morning Star, was another king to perish fighting the Iron Islands. Finally, the other name we know is Giles II, who died in a battle against the Ironborn, though his death is a bit more detailed. Giles II was taken captive in a naval battle near the Misty Islands, and then was tortured to death by Joran I Blacktide, an Ironborn High King of the Iron Islands. But because it's the Ironborn, Joran I didn't stop with torturing and killing the Gardener King. He had Giles' corpse cut into small pieces to bait fishhooks with, quote, a chunk of king. This is why everyone hates you, Ironborn. However, it should be noted that despite these kings being slain by the Ironborn, these men helped finally secure victory against the Iron Islands, and each of them helped push the domain of House Gardener further and further, and bring more and more lands beneath the rule of Highgarden. So that's enough on the Ironborn for now. Let's end part 2 by talking about the greatest Gardener king in the history of the Reach. A man that brought about a golden period lasting 3/4 of a century that the Reach would never see again. King Garth VII Gardener, called Garth Golden Han or the Golden Han, became king at the age of 12 years old and seemed to be impressive from day one. As a boy, he turned back a Dornish invasion of 10,000 men led by King Ferris Fowler through the Wide Way. King Ferris was intent on conquest, and Golden Han quickly ended his thoughts of glory in the Reach. Next, Golden Han was able to drive the last of the Ironborn from their strongholds on the Misty Islands. In doing that, he renamed them the Shield Islands and resettled them with his own men, the fiercest warriors and finest seamen he had. His goal was to turn them into the first line of defense against attacks. Mainly attacks being from the Ironborn raiders. He and future kings would continue to arm the fisher folk of the Shield Islands to protect themselves and the Mander from attack, which proved to be a wise and successful endeavor. In modern Westeros time, the men of the Four Shields still pride themselves on defending the mouth of the Mander and therefore the heart of the Reach against seaborne enemies. If Golden Han has already impressed you, wait, there's more. His final and greatest war saw him fighting against the Storm King and the King of the Rock, who had made an alliance so they could divide the Reach between themselves. They chose the wrong time in history to attack, though. Golden Han not only defeated the two kings, but was said to use such cunning words that he created division between the Storm King and the King of the Rock. There was such animosity between the men from Golden Han's words that they turned on each other and slaughtered each other at the Battle of Three Armies. Golden Han, being the amazing king he was, afterwards married his daughters to the Storm King and King of the Rock's heirs. Signing a pact with each, he had fixed the borders between the three kingdoms. Perhaps Golden Han's greatest achievement wasn't war or conquest, though. According to Maesters, he was able to give his realm and people 3/4 of a century of golden peace. In the 81 years that he ruled, he lived to 93 years old, the Reach was at war for less than 10 of them. That means generations of boys were born, grew to adulthood, had children, and died without ever going to war, which is simply amazing. The time of Golden Han's rule became known as the Golden Reign, and along with peace, there was much prosperity. When he died at 93 years old, sound of mind, but with a frail, failing body, he was succeeded by his great-grandson. Sadly, as I mentioned earlier, the Reach would never see a golden period like this again. But the Reach was heading for a change. Around the time when Golden Han's great-grandson's children took the throne, the Andals came to Westeros. So in part 3, I want to talk about how the Reach prepared for the Andals and what went down when they made their way to that part of the realm. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and come back for more videos.